right, here we go. Welcome back to La Neta. In La Neta, what we do is we break down the truth. Every single week, we take an issue and we try and understand it by looking at the facts. We lie the facts down upon the table and we ask ourselves, what is happening here? What's going on? Is this how things actually work? That's the job of La Neta. That's what we'll be doing today. And today, what we're going to be looking at is the relationship between immigration and crime. Now, I know you've heard about this relationship before. You've probably heard it from your parents, from your friends, from your family members. You certainly heard it from politicians. And the storyline goes like this, that there is an immigrant invasion going on. The immigrants are coming across our southern border with Mexico from Central America, other parts of Mexico and Latin America, and they're invading the United States. And among the many things that they will do, including perversing the American way, American culture, is they will create crime. They will plant the seeds of crime within your neighborhoods, within your communities, within your states, and across the nation. And before we know it, we will have a crime-ridden nation that we won't recognize. That's a story we've heard before. We've heard it from people like Pete Wilson.
They keep coming. 2 million illegal immigrants in California. The federal government won't stop them at the border, yet requires us to pay billions to take care of them. Governor Pete Wilson sent the National Guard to help the Border Patrol. But that's not all.
For Californians who work hard, pay taxes, and obey the laws, I'm suing to force the federal government to control the border. And I'm working to deny state services to illegal immigrants. Enough is enough.
Governor Pete Wilson.
And we've heard it from people like Donald Trump.
Here you are.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
All right, so let's go ahead and ask ourselves the question. Does immigration actually lead to more crime? So the truth of the matter is, and this is a huge body of literature, researchers have been looking at this question for the last 30 years, for nearly 3 decades, and what they have consistently found, from big cities like Chicago to Detroit to Los Angeles to smaller cities like Albuquerque and across the nation, is that where there are more foreign-born individuals, where foreign-born density is higher, where more immigrants have settled, crime across the board is lower. And so the truth of the matter, la neta, the truth is that immigrants reduce crime across all major U.S. cities. Across this nation, where there are more immigrants, there's more innovation, there is more efforts to locally reinvigorize neighborhoods, there is more effort to get involved in community, there is more entrepreneur business opportunities. Where immigrants have settled, opportunities for all Americans are better. And this research is super clear. But I know this is hard to believe because we have heard this before. Crime is a seed of immigration. But let's look at this chart. Let's look at this research. If you look at this chart, what you're going to see is that on the left-hand side, on your y-axis, you're going to see crime, right? So violent crime rates more towards the top, and then as you move down, less towards the bottom. If we zoom back out here, and we talk about this relationship, what we're going to see is that across this axis, you're going to see crime going down. And again, we'll zoom right back in so you can see this, but where undocumented share of the population, so where more undocumented immigrants have settled, and this is not even talking about documented immigrants, right? This is just looking at undocumented immigrants and the relationship between them and crime. Where there's a higher concentration of undocumented immigrants, crime is actually much lower, right? And so the truth of the matter is, even in places like Texas, where undocumented and documented migrants settle more frequently, crime goes down. But let's look at this chart from Texas. Now, this is produced by the Cato Institute, a conservative think tank out of DC, and their research also shows a similar trend. Now, this is in Texas, right? And what we see is that even undocumented immigrants commit far less crime than native-born citizens. This is true of all crimes. It's true of homicide. It's true of larceny. So immigrants, by and large, commit far less crime than native-born citizens. But let's take a look at the bad news, because all the news is not necessarily good when it comes to the relationship between immigration and crime. The unfortunate reality is And this is the bad news. The immigrants eventually acculturate, assimilate, and become Americans. And this is true in terms of culture and consumption, but it's also true when it comes to crime. So let's take a look at this chart. What you're going to see here is that first-generation immigrants, even during those peak years of crimes, those peak years in which crime goes higher, so during the teenage years, even during those years, immigrants commit far less crime than native-born citizens. And they commit far less crime than second-generation immigrants, right? But eventually, second-generation immigrants and beyond begin to look much more like native-born citizens in terms of their crime rates. All right, so every single week with La Neta, you get a story. And this week's story is about Mauricio Charca. Mauricio came from Argentina as a young man. He settled in New York City, moved on to California, and eventually retired in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I interviewed him around 2008. Mauricio Charca left Argentina because it was a land in which he didn't feel like he had the opportunity to succeed anymore. And he wanted to go to a place where his hard work would pay off. And that place was the United States. Now, Mauricio's family has a deep history of immigration. Mauricio Charca, his parents, came from Europe. They were fleeing when they left for Argentina. They were fleeing the violent persecution of Jews. And they were lucky because many of their relatives who didn't leave Europe ended up passing away in the concentration camps during World War II. Mauricio Charca's parents settled in Argentina. But for Mauricio, what he saw in Argentina, which had been a land of opportunity for his parents, he saw a land in which the good years lasted for a short period of time and the bad decades dragged on and on. So Mauricio left to the United States, where he never looked back. For nearly 40 years, he didn't go back to Argentina. He raised a family, he ran businesses, and he was successful. He was able to retire and live out his life in a way that he never imagined had he not left Argentina. And there's one thing about my conversation with Mauricio that sticks out. Towards the end of our conversation, I asked him, I said, Mauricio, if you hadn't left Argentina, would you have worked as hard? Would you have been able to realize your dreams? And he said, even if things were like they are in the United States, in Argentina, I wouldn't have realized my dreams. Because it was the act of leaving and taking a massive risk and laying everything on the line that pushed me every single day to work as hard as I could to make sure that I didn't fall short. And so his point was, taking the risk, being a migrant was a risk, right? So taking that massive step into the unknown led him to work harder than he ever would have if he had stayed in Argentina every single day, just to make sure that he fulfilled his dream. This is an image of Mauricio and Amelia when they got engaged in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, before they left for the United States. You can see as we zoom in here that the newspaper is in Yiddish, but the date is in Spanish. So this was on the 23rd of July, which was a Sunday. And as you can see, this is a Yiddish paper that Jewish folks in Buenos Aires used at the time. Now this is an image of Mauricio after he came to the United States. It's the image that was used for his naturalization paperwork. One of the things that I recall from our conversation was the pride with which Mauricio, in a deep Latino accent, because he spoke English very well but still had a strong accent because of his native Spanish, he said, when I asked him, do you think of yourself as Argentine or American? He said, American, because I've spent the majority of my life here.
And this is a question, do you consider yourself to be Argentine or from the United States? Or?
No, that's it. We are American.
And this is an image of Mauricio before he passed away nearly 3 years ago in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
How happy are you with your experience as an immigrant in the United States?
Well, I'm very happy. You know, we had things we're very sure we couldn't have over there in Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids, when we, when I started working, we were working so many hours, then grandma started working in a hospital. And I bought everything you can imagine for the kids. We have a pool table, we have a ping pong table, everything, all the kind of things where I never dream about.
That brings us to La Neta, or the truth. And the truth of the matter this week is, we need migrants more today than we ever have before in the past. Migrants are problem solvers. Migrants are innovators. Migrants are the ones that are going to come up, or are more likely to come up with, solutions to our problems. Several years ago, I wrote a piece for the Global Americans called Migrants Are the Solution, Not the Problem. And in that piece, I argued that solutions to problems require the ability to think outside the box, to break with local conventions. In order to come up with solutions, we need the ability to think beyond what we already know. This, in part, is why Einstein, who himself was an immigrant, who was born in Germany, fled to Switzerland, and eventually was able to get to the United States in 1940. Einstein said, the key to innovation is creativity. Because creativity goes beyond what we know about the world. What we know about the world is limited to the world itself. It's limited to our problems. It's limited to the issues that we already are trying to grapple with. But creativity, thinking outside the box, is what allows us to come up with solutions to our problems. And that's why we need migrants today. We need migrants like Einstein. We need migrants like Mauricio. And we need migrants because not only do they reduce crime in our communities, they allow us to think about the world in new ways. And that has value that goes beyond monetary compensation. Now, if you don't believe me, if you're still doubting me, take a look at this fact. And this is a fact that I hope that sticks with you. In the United States, immigrants make up 14% of the U.S. population. Only 14% of the U.S. population. But 56% of tech companies in the United States have been founded by immigrants. That is La Neta, and that is this week's lesson. I hope you join us again for another lesson next week. Thank you.